Well, hello and welcome back to The Long Short. I'm your host, Tom Kyo.
And I'm Drew Nicol.
Well, today we're taking a closer look at the beautiful game and specifically football clubs, one of the most chaotic, emotional and frankly irrational asset classes in the world.
If there's anyone who doesn't know, these are businesses that routinely make losses, fire their managers every 12 months and hinge millions of pounds on whether a ball crosses a line. And yet, they continue to attract the eye of private investors, including Hollywood stars, ex-football players, and even sovereign wealth funds. So what do they see that everyone else doesn't?
Well, to help us answer this question and more, we are honoured and delighted to be joined by Kieran Maguire, academic, author, and the go-to authority on football finance.
He's the author of the must-read Price's Football, which has also gone on to be one of the most popular podcasts in the game, as well as a lifelong Brighton and Hove Albion fan, making him very well qualified to talk about the risks and rewards of football ownership.
Kieran, it's an enormous pleasure to welcome you today to The Long Short.
Thanks very much, guys. Really looking forward to this.
Kieran, just a moment ago, Tom described you as the go-to voice on business football. How did you manage to achieve that title?
Like most things, it was by accident. I've been involved in teaching since the 1980s. All of my teaching life's been in Manchester and Liverpool, which are two huge footballing cities. So trying to engage and get the attention of 150, 200, 300, 19 or 20-year-olds for 3 hours on a Thursday morning, never an easy task. So if I'm trying to teach debt, if I'm trying to get across the metrics of valuation and DCFs and understanding the importance of leases and KPIs and so on, and I'm talking about Vodafone or I'm talking about BMW or Microsoft, I'm facing 150 to 300 yawns. I quickly learnt that if I wander in and say, why have United not signed any players this year? And they go, what's going on here? Let's take a look at the footnotes to the balance sheet. They owe £400 million in unpaid transfer fees. And instantly, I've got an engagement. Because football's more of an emotional investment than it is a financial investment for fans. But still, clearly, here we're to talk about the financial elements. So that was my first route. And my boss at university, he was willing to accept that because the courses that I taught used to get very positive student feedback because it was engaging with topic matters that they were quite keen on. And as much as I love teaching, and I do, I'm a huge believer in the power of education, the money's rubbish. So I moonlight. So I train on Canary Wharf, I train on Wall Street, for the investment banking community. And 20 or 21 years ago, it would have been, I was down at a particular bank, went out at lunchtime, which was 1 p.m. UK time, just to stretch my legs, came back about 30 or 40 minutes later. And these huge doormen on the door. And I say, well, I expect that at a nightclub. Don't normally expect it in the world of IB. And I noticed that some of the windows had been shuttered. And it all seemed a bit strange. Didn't think anything more about it. I just wandered back into my class and said, what's going on here? There's something, we're expecting trouble today. And they said, well, yeah, when New York opens, one of our clients, the Glazer family, is going to announce that they've taken over Manchester United via an LBO. And I thought, oh, great. So we had a chat. We spoke about the principles of the deal and so on and so forth. Thought nothing of it. And then I caught the train back from London to Manchester. I get a phone call from my boss at uni. He says, right, it's payback time. BBC have been in contact with us and they're looking for somebody who can explain what this deal is, can explain what an LBO is and so on. And I always think that I'm not smart by academic standards, but I am street smart and I'm good. My job as a teacher is to make complex issues understandable and engaging. And I'll back myself to do that most of the time. So the following morning, I go on to the BBC breakfast show, and I'm sort of overwhelmed. I'm waving to my mum because my mum's in Mayo, in Ireland. So the whole family are gathered round, and I didn't make too much of a clown of myself. So therefore, the next time a football finance story comes in, who was that bloke we spoke to the last time? You get a phone call, and things genuinely started to snowball from there, to the extent where I'm now doing around about 800 media slots a year. I mean, we're recording this at
Crazy.
1 o'clock in the afternoon,
Yeah.
and your media slot number 4,
Wow.
which is great fun, because from my point of view as an educator, what I'm doing is just an extension of what I do in the classroom, and it's trying to inform, educate, and entertain. I don't like to use that word as an academic, but you've got to keep people engaged.
Entertainer sounds perfect. Yeah. Entertainer and academic and educator. Entertainer and educator. But Kieran, congrats, like huge congrats on the success. And it's a massive success of the podcast, and the book prior to it. But I put this to you as well before we went on the episode today. I'm genuinely surprised, and what you described to me there shows that obviously there is clearly a belief there, and when it comes to being a football fan, it extends to more than just success on the pitch. But what you've put together is essentially a book around the finances of football, and then this has come into this huge success of a podcast around the finances of football. Like, have you been surprised by the popularity of this, the huge popularity of this?
Absolutely. If I wish I had had the foresight, because when I was asked to write the book by my students, because they said there's no book on football finance, and my aim was to write a book, Football Finance for Non-Financial Managers. So it was a dummy's guide to this, because I wanted to get it to a broad audience, but at the same time I am an academic. And the book came out around about 4 weeks before COVID started, which was not good timing, or so I thought at the time. I also work for the local food bank where I live. I do deliveries and collections and things like that. And people have forgotten an awful lot about COVID, but we turned into pretty unpleasant creatures. You remember all those talks of fights over toilet rolls and beans and so on.
Indeed.
And somebody broke into our food bank and stole all the food. And we're looking after people who need stuff. So I said to one of the guys there, I'll tell you what, I've got this book which has just come out. I'm teaching 150 kids. 20% of them might buy it. So that's 30 copies. The library will buy 10 more. A couple of other sports libraries might. I'm hoping to sell 100, 150 copies. I get £1 a book royalty. Tell you what, I'll give you all the royalties. You'll get 100 quid. That'll buy a little bit. And I've never had a royalty check, therefore never miss a royalty check, was my attitude. 6 weeks later, the book's #1 in the Amazon sports charts.
Amazing.
And my wife is going berserk. How much has this cost us? I'm going, you wouldn't even proofread it for me, let alone, what do you mean, how much does it cost us? So the book did take off, and I think the reason for that is that the relationship between a football fan and a football club is quite proprietorial. We say that football is the most important of the unimportant things in life, and outside of your family, it's probably, if you are a dedicated football fan, you spend too much of your time thinking about it, and therefore broadening your knowledge of the club. Because what the book set out to do, I guess, was to give the because factors. And I'm a big believer in the word because. I always say that's the what, what's the why, and to try to explain things. So it is an explainer book. I think for people working in finance, you'll probably find it dumbed down in sections because the aim is to start from zero. But it allows fans to give a bit of greater understanding as to why decisions have been made. Why have we not invested in players? How much can we afford to spend? What is the impact of qualifying for Europe or being relegated?
Mm.
Because football is an intriguing industry. When it started in 1992 in the form of the Premier League, remember the Premier League was originally a pirate product. It was a breakaway product.
That's right.
It was sort of very embryonic, and it has been spectacularly successful because it's a mature industry. Since 1992, revenues have increased by 3,246%. I know these numbers off by heart, which is why I don't get invited to parties. Which again, on a CAGR basis is fantastic. But wages have gone up by 4,300%, and player transfers have gone up by 4,500%. So it's a fascinating in the sense that the focus is on revenue. There is no focus on cost control, and that has led to the inception of cost control rules, the charges against individual clubs. And football fans are very tribal. Yep. Their club had never cheated in their lives. Everybody else wouldn't trust them to cross a road. And this has given ammunition to both sides of the argument when it comes to football. And therefore sort of the book sort of stood in the middle of that. And the podcast, which we're now, I think we're pretty close to 20 million downloads, which for ultimately it's a business. Yeah, it's me talking about amortization and profit maximization versus utility maximization theories, and sort of all of this type of stuff has proven to be very successful, to the extent that we're listened to in most football clubs. Not just in the UK, but we've had somebody from the Latvian Football Association, the Irish Football Association, the Netherlands, Romania, and different continents as well. So I think it's because we've made a deliberate policy to try to go to sort of what you might call the Valethian principles of inform, educate, entertain. And I'm very, very fortunate. I work with a professional broadcaster in Kevin Day. He writes for Have I Got News for You, A League of Their Own. He's done the rounds. He knows when I'm going too dweeby, too nerdy, and he can bring the conversation back to what we're trying to do. Two blokes in a pub, sitting across. What's all this amortization nonsense I'm reading about? And I go, oh, I know a bit about that. And it's sort of caught an audience. And if you take a look at the demographics, that they are in the main men of a certain age.
Indeed. So for listeners who are not familiar then, Kieran, with the economics of running a football club, and this is what your book's all about, and this is what your podcast goes to, EBITDA, as you say, depreciation, amortization, all terms that our listeners understand very, very well. But what are the key things then they should understand for those who are not familiar with the economics of running a football club?
Well, I think so. You have to take a step back and first of all look at the ownership models. What owning a football club does is that for a relatively modest investment, it gives you a huge megaphone. Because of the level of interest in football, you can get a degree of interest in you as an individual, or a sovereign wealth fund, or a hedge fund, or a private equity that you would not achieve for any other investment at the same level. And there are people who have come into football with the view that sort of traditional sort of PE style, that it's a poorly run industry. It's not delivering in terms of the level of profitability that you would expect for the growth in revenues. And therefore we can change the culture, we can change the strategy of the industry. Against that, you have people who have come into football because they're looking for soft power. They want to use football as a vehicle to do deals. And what better place to do a deal than in the boardroom of a football match when you're hosting Barcelona or Bayern Munich? It's a very alluring. It's got scarcity value as well, and again that attracts a certain investor class. And on the back of that, it's proven to be challenging. I mean, you Tom, you informed me earlier that you're a Spurs fan,
Long suffering.
long-suffering Spurs fan.
Yes.
Spurs have, for practically every year since the inception of the Premier League, they've been the most profitable club
They have.
in English football. So presumably you would take pride from that if you're going to use that as the KPIs through which you're going to determine your level of satisfaction with your club. But I suspect that's not the case, because the KPIs that the fan base use are achievements on the pitch in terms of success. And it's that battle. Football, ultimately, it's a talent industry. Talent follows the money, and therefore you've got to go and put in the money. Now, in the case of Spurs, they've had the lowest wage to revenue ratio of all clubs in the Premier League, probably 19 years out of the last 20, which is an achievement. The other achievement is they've not won very much. So I think it's a fascinating paradox between what are we actually seeking to achieve through the ownership of football clubs. Is it possible to make money? Yes, it is. Look at the Glazer family at Manchester United. It was a brilliant, brilliant deal. You know, a classic LBO. You go in, you get the banks to effectively provide 90% of the funding. You allow the club happened to be in the right place at the right time. So revenues have gone up. The value of the club, which was around about 700 million sterling in 2005,
Yep.
I think when a recent investment, a minority investment, took place, it valued it around about 8 to 9 times the original purchase price. And you do that on an LBO basis. With the bank still picking up their share. And as far as those original equity investors were concerned 20 years ago, they've increased the value of their investment by 40 or 50 fold. So it can be done. We've seen similar at Liverpool Football Club, bought in 2009 as a distressed asset for 300 million. It's now worth 12 times that. So it can be achieved. And you mentioned Hollywood earlier in the conversation. Rob and Ryan, and I feel duty bound here. This is how I try to impress both the kids and their parents on University Open Day. Ryan Reynolds follows me on Twitter. Now, Ryan Reynolds should not be following a
Kieran
nerdy accounting teacher
Edutainer, Kieran. You're an edutainer.
on social media. But again, I think it's nothing to do with it. It's testament to how serious football finances take it. So, and they go, and the dads and the mums go, oh, yeah, are you a celebrity? No, I'm not. I'm a teacher. And they acquired Wrexham Football Club 5 years ago for £2 million. They could sell it today for 300 or 400, provided there was some form of earn-out clause which kept them at the club for another 5 years. So money can be made. Equally, money can be spectacularly lost. So it's a potentially high return, high risk industry. There's a touch of Hollywood about it. There's a touch of glamour about it. It's always nice to be able to say, yeah, I was chatting to the Spanish captain, or I was chatting to Pep the other day, and so on, in terms of the famous people involved in what is the most global sport. Yeah. And English football in particular, it made some really smart decisions 30 years ago. It gave away the TV rights to an international audience. And then 5 years later, when it went back to renew those rights, the broadcasters said, you're the one product that stops our consumers from cutting the cable. And the Premier League said, thanks for telling us that. You probably shouldn't have told us that. Tell you what, we're now going to ask for a fee. And the Premier League is the only league in world sport, in world football for certain, but I think for world sport, where the value of the international rights is greater than the amount which is generated domestically.
I'm going to out myself early on in the conversation as being not a fanatic football fan, which might mean that me and Tom are a good yin and yang for this specific conversation, even more than normal on the podcast. So I'm going to ask a very basic question, hopefully will be useful to others as well. When investors are buying a club, beyond the obvious answer, what is it that they are actually buying? You've sort of alluded to the clout, the megaphone, the brand, but there are other ways to do that. And then there's sort of the other side of the question is the bricks and mortar. There's the data, the players. Like when money changes hands, what is it that they're buying, and more specifically, like of the various components of that, which bit is often the most valuable bit?
Okay, I think as far as the traditional balance sheet is concerned, yes, you are acquiring real estate. It's really poor real estate in the sense that it generates revenue for 30 days a year if you're fortunate. You wouldn't do that in retail, you wouldn't do that in manufacturing, you wouldn't do that for an investment property. So yes, there is a real estate acquisition, but that's not the main reason. You're also acquiring the unexpired elements of football player contracts. Now football players are inventory. Football players are effectively investments. It's a bit like buying an equity portfolio, and some of them will have substantial increases in value. Some of them will expire quietly, and you won't make a return. I think the main reason why people are investing is that you're investing in brand loyalty, which exists in the football industry to a greater extent than any other that I can envisage from a personal basis. Like many people, I'm a huge Apple fan. I've got my MacBook, I've got my iMac, I've got my iPhone, I've got my AirPods. I've got the full set. But at the same time, if Samsung phone me up and say, Kieran, we want to do a Samsung promotion, are you prepared to ditch all of your Apple products and we'll give you free Samsung alternatives for the next 5-10 years? Show me the dotted line, I'll sign on it. When it comes to football, when a football fan signs that invisible contract, and it is an invisible contract, as Tom would have signed many years ago, what you're actually committing yourself to is a cradle to grave relationship with that brand. So that means as far as future cash flows are concerned, they are almost guaranteed. I'm supposedly an intelligent human being. I commute 250 miles to work every Monday and 250 miles back every Friday, simply because that allows me to live close to where the football club that I choose to support operates, and it allows me to go to matches that much easier. That's stupid, but that stupid degree of brand loyalty is what you're buying into. Fans will pay the extortionate prices for inadequately produced merchandise. They will renew their season tickets. They will buy into all of that. And also, they will consume other elements of the football club. So if you take a look at the apps, if you take a look at the engagement and the relationships between the service provider, which is the football club, and the consumer, there will be a far greater degree of engagement than with any other brand. Yes, I've got Apple products, but I don't go onto the Apple website every day. I do go onto my football club website. I do engage by looking at reading the podcasts, following all the stories in the national and the local media and so on. And that therefore gives a window of opportunity from marketing, from advertising, from other forms of engagement. And that is where the value lies as far as football is concerned. If you compare the Manchester United equity value per the balance sheet compared to the market cap, well, the first is a fraction of the other. It's probably no more than 10%. So the value is in that intangible engagement and brand alliance that you see between club and fan.
And often, well, in our industry, we talk about alpha, the edge, the investment edge, and then there's been lots of debate around how do you quantify that. And we talk about, it's through research, it's through sweat, it's through a combination of both, it's through having great minds and brilliance of being able to find new opportunities in investment. So have you described then, Kieran, the alpha of football investing then? That undying loyalty to the brand and really investing in that, saying that that is going to be what's going to get us from investing in it in day zero, and then if ultimately we do want to make a good exit, or we want to keep that and it's in perpetuity, it continues to return investment for us.
Absolutely, because managers come and go, players come and go, the fans are the constant, and you don't see that in practically other industry. Things do go in and out of fashion. If you're committed to a football club, it's I often describe the relationship between fan and football club, which is this difference, is a bit like the relationship between parent and child. You don't necessarily always like them, but
Yes.
you always love them, and it's that. I appreciate I'm talking to on a finance podcast, and to use a word like that might seem inconsistent from an investor perspective, but it is that degree of devotion and love. How many people do you know have tattoos of their local grocery store because they like the groceries? Probably none. I'm here in the city of Liverpool. There's an awful lot of Liverpool tattoos. There's an awful lot of Everton tattoos, and you go across to Manchester and you will see the same. You won't find people inking for practically any other industry's products or services, and that is, I think, where that edge exists. And then it's a case of, have you overpaid at the point of entry compared to the point of exit? And just like timing and politics, as we all know, in investing is a timing issue.
So for those people who will be listening in, and there will be investors among them, where is the money coming from, and which leagues? Well, we've talked about the Premier League, but what other leagues are attracting the most interest? We obviously talked about the Wrexham purchase as well, but what other leagues are seeing the most interest?
Well, the people not familiar with sort of the English or the sort of the British football environment, there are 5 tiers of professional football. The Premier League is the most notorious, the most famous. It by far generates the greatest amount of income. So that's reflected in the entry price. You're not going to be able to buy a Premier League football club these days for anything less than £400 million. At the top end, you're probably looking at 10 to 12 times that. If you drop down a tier, I can get you a football club for 30 to 40 million. And you might say, well, all we need to do is to get from tier 2 to tier 1. That can't be too difficult, can it? Well, you're up against 24 clubs every season that are trying to do that. And what you find is here, from an operational point of view, the industry encourages a casino mentality, because the difference in broadcast revenues goes from £12 million to 110. If you get this promotion from one division to another, you're getting an increase in a factor of 8 or 9 as far as your broadcast revenue. Plus, you're now experimenting and integrating with global products and global brands who will pay you accordingly. So there's this huge uptick in revenues. How do you get there? You have to have the better players. How do you get the better players? You pay them higher wages. And what we find is it's a bit like going to a poker table. You got to pay to play. And the average losses in English football in the second tier on a pure operational level is around about £25 million a year. Yeah, that's what, 35 million bucks. If you have 4 or 5 seasons of that, you've paid more than your initial investment has gone out in terms of operational losses, and that's in an environment where there are, in theory, cost control measures to try to prevent excess spending, and those measures effectively fail. They are. I used to teach creative accounting, again for the investment banking community. Sort of dried up in 2007. I've got no idea why. My phone stopped ringing after that particular year, but I'm quite familiar with. I'm a qualified accountant, and that's my historical background. I'm aware of how to enhance revenue and to depress costs through a variety of means. Therefore, the cost control measures, they're not always applied appropriately or ethically by clubs, but club owners, that's their choice.
I just want to change the topic slightly because you hinted at this before, but I just wanted to give you a chance to answer this more fully. And that's about the importance of the manager. When you, again, for any non-football fans listening, would it be fair to say that the manager is the CEO of the company in another life? And if so, does that give a realistic sense to the importance of the manager and getting the right one in terms of the impact on the success or failure of the club?
I think it's an intriguing. Ultimately, he's COO more than CEO, in my view, because quite often the manager could be independent of recruitment, so therefore it's his or theory or her opportunity to take what is delivered to them and try to overperform in terms of results. The cult of the manager, I find, is an intriguing one. That there's a very good book by Szymanski called Soccernomics, which has done a statistical and analytical approach to manager and outputs. Now, again, I'm going to take advantage of Tom's devotion to his club, Spurs. You are on manager 3.5.
Manager 3.5, yes, that's right.
Since last August. Now, in what other industry would you get through 3.5 chief executives in a year? And yet the average tenure of a manager in the second tier of English football is 10 months, and in the Premier League itself it's a little bit higher, but not necessarily. So you are gambling on the ability of one individual to inspire people from a technical, from a tactical, from a physical, from a psychological, from a motivational perspective, to take 11 young men from the ages of 20 to early 30s and to get them to gel as a combined unit, to deliver in terms of productivity. And we measure productivity in football in terms of the ultimate results on the pitch. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily a CEO, although you could say, well, isn't that what a good CEO does to the board of directors? It's about getting the individuals to work together. But the people that appoint the manager are the board, and therefore ultimately the owners, and they are the ultimate decision makers. And certainly what we see in football is that there is a belief, which is not backed up by statistical evidence, by the way, but there is a belief that change is the same as improvement. And that's why we tend to see a high turnover there, which is not necessarily backed up by the evidence when you look at it through an analytical point of view. But the one thing I would observe about football is that that's a rational approach I've just taken to the explanation, and football is the most irrational of asset classes.
So, Kieran, that's very clear. And I have two questions for that. Is how much influence does a manager have at a board level, and how much influence should a manager have at board level? Because you talked about the brand, and that's something we understand very, very clearly here. Both Drew and I, lead the comms effort at an industry association like AIMA, which represents the largest alternative investment industry globally. Um, so, should managers play much bigger role then in shaping the club's brand and the public image beyond just getting results on the pitch with the 11, young men or young women like you described?
Well, I think here the answer is a bit of a cop out. It depends. It depends upon the culture of the club. There will be some clubs have realised that if you're going to be changing the manager every 12 to 14 months, and if the manager is given carte blanche to therefore, on the back of that, have control over recruitment and retention. Football players are expensive to buy. We have, I've got the figures here in front of me for the cost of individual squads. It's the highest is 1.6 billion sterling, so that's 2 billion. That's just your recruitment costs of getting the players. Effectively, it's your the fees that are charged to release them from their previous employers. Then there are wages. The average wages in the Premier League are between 4 to 5 million sterling a year. At the elite end, you are looking close to double that. So it is a very expensive. And therefore, if a manager comes in and says, I'm in control of recruitment and retention, I want those 6 players to go and I want those 6 players to come in, that's a very expensive exercise. If the manager is in a strong negotiating position when they join the club, it could be that the club is distressed. So here, again, talking about Tom's club, Tottenham, the new manager, Roberto De Zerbi, has that particular power. Then they might be able to extract concessions from the board. But what we have seen, because of the inflationary impact of player recruitment, we now have a sort of an interface between board and football manager, and this is called the director of football or the sporting director, who in theory is there to be that adjunct, to be able to bring those two parties together. And the logic is the manager therefore becomes a technical and tactical coach who has to apply the players that have been recruited, and this should reduce churn. This should reduce the potential losses that arise as a result of changes in the operational manager area. That model is unproven, and as an academic, it's great. It gives my colleagues the opportunity to write very long and very detailed and very complex papers, comparing and contrasting. But the jury is out. And again, without wanting to get people to buy too many books, there's a really good book called How to Win the Premier League, which is written by Liverpool Football Club's former director of research. And
Interesting.
I've forgotten his name offhand, but I had him on my podcast, and you just sat there and listened, because how to identify talent from an algorithmic, to adopt the Billy Bean approach, and to apply that to football, which is far more of a team sport than baseball. Yeah. Because baseball, ultimately, it's one pitcher, one hitter, and yes, all the rest of the secondary cast. In football, it's an integrated sport. Was absolutely fascinating, but we are seeing different structures, different cultures operating at different clubs, some of which have allowed those clubs to overperform compared to the key performance metrics of player recruitment costs and player employment costs. And if you take a look at those clubs, that they tend to be where what you might call a more progressive culture is being employed, but also far more reliant upon new skills and new ways of assessing talent than the sort of traditional, he looks good on YouTube, I'll go and watch him on a Thursday night.
I would love to know more about the parameters, which seem quite broad from what you've said, that govern how these clubs and, importantly, their underlying investors are able to navigate and how to execute their strategy in terms of investing in the clubs. And I wanted to raise the point that the UK government has introduced an independent football regulator, which I think is arguably one of the most structural changes to the game that we've seen in some decade. And the underlying argument here is that football clubs, as you mentioned, are not just normal businesses. They have a community, they have the branding and everything as you've explained it, but that the game itself, the free market as it were, has failed to regulate itself effectively in this specific instance. So just for listeners, just so they understand, the IFR has three core objectives: to protect and promote the financial soundness of regulated football clubs, to protect and promote financial resiliency of English football, and safeguard the heritage of English football. So obviously something was going wrong, and I think there was some specific developments outside the UK as well, which led to the formation of this institution, this regulator. But how important is it that this body now exists? Is it the right entity to address the problem that it had identified? And broadly, how significant is this in terms of bringing in those guardrails that investors into football clubs have to manage?
I think this is a very valid question, and for the sake of complete transparency, I was asked by the UK government in 2021 and 2022 with Dr. Christina Philippou to write two, for want of a better phrase, state of the game pieces of analysis and research into the financial structure of English football. And one of those was during COVID, and the second was during the post-COVID period, to see how the industry had managed to transition from what was a fairly challenging, because you're playing football in empty stadiums, so a major source of income had disappeared, and there were other restrictions to deal with as well. I think it's from a theoretical point of view. I'm a free marketeer. I would say, therefore, let clubs die. If they're running in an incompetent manner, we'd say the same in every other industry. But as you alluded to there, Drew, football clubs are part of history, heritage, identity, culture of individual towns and cities, and therefore you wouldn't let part of the rest of the culture of that town or city die. Should therefore that be allowed on the whim of an individual through greed, incompetence, or corruption? Should that individual be allowed to destroy a football club in order to make a financial return, in order to convert the stadium into other real estate assets, and so on? So therefore, I think the view was taken by the UK government was that the football industry itself had proven itself to be focused on short-term self-interest, which is nothing wrong. We make short-term self-interest decisions every day of the week, and therefore to have some form of greater checks and balances apply. Now, the legislation which has been introduced is designed to be light touch, because English football is incredibly popular, both from a spectator point of view, from a broadcast point of view, and from an investor point of view. So what you don't want to do is to make a set of rules which are too draconian as far as the investment class are concerned. And I think it broadly achieved those aims, in the sense that if I am looking to invest, do I want to have a degree of confidence about the integrity of the industry? Well, that can be enhanced. The the introduction of real-time monitoring, the introduction of expanded investigations into the backgrounds of owners, not just whether or not they've got the money, but also the ability to investigate further the sources of wealth of individuals can help the game. And also, what we have seen, the regulator was first mooted in 21, 22. There has been a continued wave of investment into English football and Scottish football since then, especially from American investors. The original interest that we were seeing perhaps a decade ago from Asia and especially China, that has dried up. I think there's been a change of philosophy from the Chinese national government in terms of its enthusiasm for football, and I think that's therefore impacted upon investors on either a corporate or an individual level. I occasionally get on calls with investors, and the regulator doesn't tend to come up in conversation. They're more interested in the upticks which are potentially available at individual clubs. If you've got some form of control, if that results in excess spending being tempered, then that can only be good from an investment perspective. So it's a strange one. There is a lot of opposition within the football industry itself to the regulator, but that's perfectly understandable. If I was running a business and given the choice between running it myself or having to abide by slightly more guidelines and regulations, I'd probably choose the first of those options. But I think that the scare tactics that have been put out by the opponents of the regulator haven't really come to fruition. And I think we've just been through, ironically, in sort of the last week or so, one of the first elements which could be deemed to be a success. So there's a football club called Sheffield Wednesday, which was in a very financially precarious position. An owner had bought into the club, had run out of money, and was being fairly inflexible in terms of how he continued to run the club. Players weren't being paid, suppliers weren't being paid, and so on. The government was able to put soft pressure onto the owner through utilising the government's tax collecting body, the HMRC, to issue a winding up order. That forced the club into sort of a formal corporate bankruptcy, and then last week the club was sold. Again, there was the involvement of the independent football regulator, albeit at an arm's length basis, which helped the deal to go through. So the pluses outweigh the minuses. The concerns about costs are absolutely valid. Concerns about mission creep are equally valid. There's no evidence of that. But if the regulator continues to operate in a professional manner, and it's interesting that the regulator's approach, which is different to that of the football authorities themselves, which was very rule-based, the regulators is very risk-based, and if that can reduce the risk of more corporate distress, well, as any investor will know, you de-risk an investment, it has a positive impact upon valuation. So I think the regulator can broadly be seen to be more positive than negative.
Kieran, can I bring up a bit of a bugbear? It is close to my heart, and it's close to a lot of grassroots fans and those who were involved in volunteering and grassroots football. I mean, it would be remiss of me not to ask you this question. But our feeling is that there's still a huge disparity in grassroots football and elite football. My son plays for Corinthian Casuals Football Club. This was a merger, as you know, of the defining amateur clubs of early football. You had Corinthian FC and Casual FC, both clubs established in the 1880s. Now, I think it's fair to say, and they won't mind me saying so, but the club is running a shoestring.
Yeah.
Every weekend, coaches like myself and parents are volunteering, giving up their time, putting up the goals and nets, running the line, managing the car park, running the tea stand. But more money should be passed down the football pyramid, right?
Yes and no. And the reason why I say that is part of the reason why you're operating in a shoestring is that you're being asked to pay too much to hire the pitches. Now, why is that the case? Why is there a lack of maintenance going into local municipality owned football facilities? That's a much broader macroeconomic issue in terms of a lack of investment by government in sporting facilities, in youth development, in terms of health issues and so on. And I think, in my view, it should be a more of a central government issue and a local government issue to provide those facilities, because you're providing that funding directly and indirectly through your tax contributions, and you're not getting a return on that investment because it's an easy cut to make. We'll put up the price of a pitch by £50 per match, and we know that the parents will pay an extra £5 per kid per match because the kids want to play and the parents want to see them play, and so on. If you're going to say to a loss-making industry, and that's what football is, of the 51 clubs that have participated in the Premier League since it commenced in 1992, only 12 have got a positive balance on their retained earnings since that period. So if you're going to say to a loss-making industry, you need to divert more of your resources elsewhere, I would say that that's not necessarily borne out through the finances. Now, people will then say, and I absolutely understand where they're coming from, well, the players are paid too much. And here again, we go into one of the paradoxes of football. I do an awful lot of work on individual club podcasts, local media, and so on, where this is one of the things which is constantly presented to me as the solution: pay them less. If you pay them less, they don't come to your club. If you pay them less, they'll go and play in Spain. If you pay them less, then you run the risk of losing some of your best assets. And if you want success on the pitch, and the solution, according to most fans, is that somebody should be paying for that new signing. Somebody should be meeting the wage demands of player X, because that player X is making a difference on the pitch. And the person who should be paying that should be anybody apart from me. And by that, they normally mean the club owner. So professional football is being subsidised by owners. Now, whether those owners are sovereign wealth funds, whether those are individual funds, such as the ones we have at Chelsea, or from wealthy individuals, they are still being subsidised. If you're asking those individuals and those groups to provide further subsidies for football at youth level and football at grassroots level, I'm not sure that the argument holds up.
Interesting.
Tom, we've picked on you a little bit throughout this podcast, but unfortunately, Spurs is such a perfect example for. Well, I wanted to bring up this point, this really fascinating point you raised earlier, Kieran, about the multiples that can be generated or lost based on promotion, and we've mentioned Wrexham and other examples, but on the other end of the spectrum, you once again have Spurs. And we are at that time in the season when
just this year. Last year as well. Yeah. Okay. Anyway,
you wrote a piece last month that estimated the headline number of being relegated was approximately 250 million. Can you just walk us through that number and explain exactly where the losses come from? Presumably there's a few different streams here that come together.
That's right. And first of all, we've got to stress this is impact upon top line and not bottom.
Yeah.
Which and in the world of football, that's it, that they don't seem to be able to put those two issues together. But football clubs generate their revenue from three main areas. First of all, we've got the broadcast deals. Now, the Premier League broadcast deal is worth twice that of Italy, twice that of Germany, twice that of Spain, and probably 10 to 20 times that of France. We've had a collapse in the French broadcast deal market over the course of the last 18 months to 2 years. In the Premier League, Spurs last year, they will have generated somewhere in the region of 130 to 140 million pounds. In the Championship, you get 12. Now, in order to assist clubs to acclimatise to a different footballing environment, we have what we refer to as parachute payments. So Spurs won't go from 130 to 12, they'll go from 130 to probably around about 50. Spurs have also participated in European football this year, and they have been in the Premier European competition, which is called the Champions League. And on the back of that, they will have made, based on my figures, probably around about £60 million in prize money. On top of that, they will have got bonuses from sponsors as well. The second source of revenue is your ticket sales. Now, your overall ticket revenue for a season is the number of matches times the number of people attending each match times your yield per fan per match. Spurs last season had the second highest yield per fan per match. They had the third largest average attendances in English football. And here Tom can beat his chest a bit more. They were successful in Europe. They won a competition, so therefore they had more home games. They were able to get a high yield because they were playing, first of all, in Europe at some high-profile matches, and they were playing against Manchester United and Chelsea and Liverpool. So therefore, they could price accordingly. If they are relegated, they will be playing against Lincoln. For people not familiar in Lincoln, you probably have to Google it. Lincoln City, who have just been promoted from the third tier to the second tier. They'll be. You will not be able. Spurs' average price per fan, based on my figures, probably about £86 per fan per match. Would you pay that for second tier entertainment? It's the same in music. I'm probably more of a fan of music than I am of football. But if I'm going to see an alpha band, if I'm going to see the Foo Fighters, if I'm going to see Metallica or wherever it's going to be, or The Cure, I'm willing to pay alpha prices. If it's Suede and the Manic Street Preachers, I'm still going to go and see them, but I don't expect them to be able to go and monetize me to the same extent. So therefore, the yield is lower. The capacity, there'll be less people turning up on a Tuesday night because it's Barnsley or was Cardiff at home. To get 60 odd thousand people to turn up, I think it's that much more difficult. And potentially if the club's not in Europe. So you've lost 60 or 70 million pounds worth of European money. You're down 90 million pounds in terms of the Premier League TV deal. You're probably therefore going to get a 20 to 25% cut in match day. And then if you think that Nike are going to pay you £50 million a year for manufacturing your kit for second tier football, think again. So the front of shirt deal, which is worth probably £50 million a year to Spurs, if they get a tenth of that in second tier football, they'll be fortunate. And the reason why I say that is the Premier League is broadcast to 190 countries around the world. So therefore, that's 190 countries worth of eyeballs. They're not watching second tier English football because they're watching the Champions League, or that they'll go. The international audiences in particular will focus on other clubs. So therefore, because they're not generating the eyeballs, the sponsors will say, "Well, we've got step down contracts. You've failed to deliver Premier League standard of product. So therefore, we're not prepared to pay a Premier League standard of price. And you add all of those factors together, and that's how I came to the conclusion of around about £250 million sterling.
Such a sobering stat, and it's not always that these clubs bounce straight back up either Kieran. Look at the plight of Leicester City. I mean, 10 years ago they won the Premier League, right? And now they've had two successive relegations. That threatens their entire business model in terms of how you've described it. Have you done a rough estimate of how costly relegation to the third tier is for them and clubs like them that have had that experience?
Yeah, for a club such as Leicester, I have very significant concerns because the owners are an organisation called King Power. They specialise in duty free activity in Asia. They have suffered both during and consequent to COVID. So therefore, their ability to provide additional funding, to provide the subsidies for the club, are restricted. What Leicester City have done by being relegated, and part of the reason that they've been relegated is due to poor cost control, and they've breached the cost control rules, which has meant that they've suffered an on-field penalty of a deduction of 6 points. The way that the money is allocated in what we call the English Football League, we've got the Premier League, which is a standalone product. We've then got the next governing body, is that 80% of the broadcast money goes to the Championship, 12% goes to League One, 8% goes to League Two. So 12 months ago, Leicester City were in the Premier League. They got, I think it was 110, 112 million pounds. Next year in League One, they will get £2 million from the EFL TV deal, and again, consequent impact on sponsors, on attendances, and so on. And what concerns me most of all with Leicester City is that they've used invoice discounting to effectively borrow against future revenue streams. Either that's through the sale of football players, where most football transfers are negotiated on an instalment basis. You'll get annual payments. So if I sell a player, it's 10 million now, it's 10 million in a year, and 10 million in 2 years. Well, what Leicester City have done is that they've taken those two IOUs from the new club where the player is, and they've cashed those in. They've done that with their parachute payments as well. So, my accounting background was corporate distress, forensic, insolvency, whatever you want to call it, and therefore, I'm an old-fashioned cash is king devotee, and that's where my concerns with Leicester City realise. They have got players who last year were on £90,000 a week. Well, that's that's £4.5 million a year. Next year, your TV revenue is £2 million.
It is staggering. Very sobering stuff.
There's a really important part of this conversation we've not touched on yet, and anyone who's listening in from the PE world will probably be screaming this question out, which is you've described forced sales, we've talked about relegations, but surely the key question we haven't addressed is how to make a good exit from this investment. A lot of the time, the principal, presumably, I guess maybe, especially when we're talking about sovereign wealth or companies as opposed to high net worth individuals, presumably at some point there is an exit strategy, or at least they have a long-term target. Maybe I'm wrong, but could you just talk us through what does, beyond just on-the-field success and carrying on for year on year, what does a successful exit look like here?
Well, I think it's a very valid point. I think the traditional perspective of PE as get in, hollow out costs, you're looking for the exit door the minute you walk through the door, is too short a time frame. The 3 to 5 year opportunity, I think you need to look at a longer time horizon than that. At the same time, we have seen some spectacular successes. There's a football club called Ipswich Town, whose most famous fan is Ed Sheeran, the singer, who even sponsored the club shirts. They were acquired by a fund when they were in the third tier of English football. They then sold a minority stake 12 months later when they managed to get up to the second tier to recover their money, and now they've just been promoted back to the Premier League. So I think you have to have confidence in the ability of the senior management team to deliver some form of on-field stability, even if it's not success. Stability can be really useful. So if we take a look at Crystal Palace, there was a club again. It had gone into administration. It had been through a corporate bankruptcy situation. It was bought out in 2010 for 10, 12 million at the time. It's now been in the Premier League for 12 years. It's playing in European football this season. Its value 400 to 500 million. So they did that on the basis of having a recruitment strategy. And a recruitment strategy is an investment strategy. And instead of investing in equities, instead of investing in corporates, you are investing in young men and their ability to deliver. Now, how you utilize that strategy and how you combine groups of players who together will where the sum of the parts is greater than, or where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. That comes down to having a culture at the club, and I do think that's really important. If you look at those clubs who have outperformed financially, that they have a definitive way of going about things. That can be at odds with the interests of other stakeholders. The media don't like boring. The media want something to be able to report. Fans want to be indulged. They want the club to be involved in the recruitment of trophy assets rather than assets which in the form of new players who will actually genuinely make a difference but might do it in a non-glamorous manner. And I think that is at odds with sort of the traditional PE philosophy. And I'd also always add caution, because you are trying to operate in an industry where traditional financial rules don't apply. Because if your KPIs are non-financial and you're entering the industry as a PE house, and remember, in normal business, what are we trying to do? We're trying to get rid of the competition. Well, in football, you need the competition, because by definition, you're playing against other sides, some of whom will have owners for whom the football club is a trophy asset, and therefore they're prepared to treat it in a way that they would treat any other hobby. And certainly, when I've spoken to some senior people, within the football administration market, this is the conclusion that we often come to: is that trying to view football through a traditional lens is difficult, if not impossible, and therefore I would add caution for anybody that was going to enter the industry, unless you're able to do something as how you had the European Super League come to fruition. Wow. That's the perfect vehicle for PE, because you de-risk it, because it's an invitation-only tournament. There is no relegation. There would be an agreement in a similar manner to what we see in American franchise sport, NBA, NFL, and so on. We're going to operate cost controls. We're going to operate wage controls. We're not going to have transfers of players from one Super League club to another. And all of a sudden, if you take a look at the negotiation power between player and football club, at present, the players have probably got a slightly stronger hand. The European Super League would have taken that away. So the Super League's proposal was to have wages capped at 45% of revenue. So again, from an investor's point of view, absolutely fantastic. But that particular project failed because it failed to take into consideration that football is an irrational industry, and you have a stakeholder group who were the fans of these bigger clubs who rejected those proposals, even though it was in their interest to have Super League, because it went against sort of the sporting ethos of fair play and meritocracy.
We're getting almost to the end of this episode, and I know you're about to jump onto another interview, Kieran, such as your celebrity status and your in demand appetite for people to speak to and people to speak with you. But I thought I have just a few more questions that I want to really get your thoughts on. Firstly, is about women's football. I mean, here in this country, there's been enormous success on the back of the Lioness success. And then you have, in terms of the global game as well, and the development that we've seen in the global game in women's football. Do you see that as another compelling investment opportunity in global sports?
I wouldn't say compelling. I think there is a pricing issue
Right.
in women's football. So I work in the city of Liverpool.
Yep.
Liverpool women's team are playing at Anfield in the next few weeks, and it costs you £12 as an adult, £5 as a child. That's fantastic. You know, you have them spectate. That's fantastic.
Absolutely.
Compared to what you have to go and pay to the men's team, you know, it's a fifth or a sixth.
Yeah.
I think women's football has growth potential, but the problem with every sport in the UK, but also arguably within many places of Europe, is that there is a cuckoo in the nest, and that cuckoo is not just men's football; it is the Premier League. Everybody's trying to get interest in terms of eyeballs on screens. Last night, BBC were offering for free the opportunity to see Brighton Hove Albion women's team play Arsenal's women's team, and Arsenal had to win the match to have any chance of winning the Women's League, and that was up against Bayern Munich versus Paris Saint-Germain men's team. Where do you think the viewers went?
Of course.
So the product is improving. The pricing is at an interesting point. If you give it away, then you've got a problem, because if I'm only going to be charged £5 or £10 to go and watch and the weather's poor, I'll say forget it. Whereas if I paid £50 for a men's ticket, I paid £50, I'm going to watch the match. So there's a risk of no-shows. There's a risk of people equating low prices with a low quality product, and therefore being prejudiced against that. And there's also sort of the historical issues of the women's football is a start-up industry as far as this country is concerned, because the English Football Association banned women from playing football for 50 years. So it's having to come from a long way back. There is investment taking place. So the team that I support, Brighton, last week, the owner said he's going to put £80 million into a dedicated stadium to host women's football. But equally, it's noticeable that stadium's got a capacity of 10,000. The men's team plays in a 32,000 capacity stadium. So that's an acknowledgement that I think the ceiling for women's football is lower. We have seen some women's team be sold at high prices, and also if you take a look in the NWSL, the American Women's League, the franchise prices for those teams is quite high. But I think there's a different soccer culture in the United States. So the jury is out. I want women's football to succeed because my wife watches football. I've got two granddaughters who will watch football if I'm a success, and I want them to be proud. I went to the European finals to see the England team beat Germany, 3 or 4 years ago. One of the best sporting experiences of my life. So I think from a cultural and from educational and from the liberal me wants it to succeed, but all of the clubs are losing money. All of the clubs would be losing even more money if the proportion of the sponsorship revenues that they get from the combined men and women's team. There's perhaps a little bit is going to the women, which wouldn't necessarily go if you were doing independent negotiations and so on. So, like many startup industries, it's losing money. It's got to find its audience. My view is if we're patient, and if men stop patronising the sports, and it is men who patronise women's football, then it's got a chance of success. But there's no guarantee.
We couldn't let you go without bringing up the World Cup, which is imminent. I think my key question here is just around the economic benefits of hosting this tournament. Obviously, huge upfront costs for all sorts of infrastructure and procedural efforts to get these tournaments up and running and to go smoothly. But presumably there are some economic benefits as well. Could you just talk us through what those are, maybe during the tournament and then in the years following as well?
Right. I mean, there has been academic research undertaken into hosting global sporting tournaments, so the World Cup and the Olympics and so on. This century, there has only been one which has delivered a net economic benefit, and that was the World Cup in Germany in 2006. Germany already had the stadium, it already had the hotels, it normally already had the transport infrastructure and so on. All of the others have been substantially loss-making. If we take a look at the last edition of the FIFA World Cup, which took place in Qatar in 2022, the estimated losses there were somewhere in the region of 100 to 120 billion dollars, because the infrastructure wasn't there, the stadium wasn't there, and when was the last time you heard people talk about Qatari football?
Yeah.
Right.
So I'm always very cautious. FIFA, which is the world governing body of football, they are claiming that there will be a $30 billion economic benefit to the United States and Mexico and Canada as a result of the 2026 World Cup. Having been through some of those very glossy reports historically, they are very good at overstating the positives and ignoring things which would be picked up, I think, by any good economist. You're assuming that people who would have gone to the United States on vacation this summer will still go there. Well, they won't, because they'll give it a miss because the World Cup's taking place. You're assuming that the legacy benefits of health, which is often claimed when these mega tournaments take place, that those will be delivered upon. Well, the evidence I can assure you from the UK after the hosting the Olympics in 2012, we're not running and throwing and skipping and jumping and swimming to any greater extent than we were prior to the tournament. So some of the soft benefits which are claimed, if you take a look at a report which came out this week from the American hospitality industry, they've said that bookings are soft.
Yeah.
The level of sales of tickets, and we are 6 weeks away from the commencement of the FIFA World Cup. FIFA is still trying to sell tickets. If you go onto the FIFA website, and yet FIFA were claiming and have claimed from over the course of the last week, there's been unprecedented demand. So there's a lot of inconsistencies between what was anticipated as far as success of this competition is concerned, and what is actually being delivered. So that there is little hard evidence to back up the claims that hosting a World Cup will be a success. It was certainly not a success financially for the Qatari authorities, but they would argue we did deals. We had people in the director's box. We had people in hospitality. We brought partners together, and therefore there could be intangible benefits, but the links are tenuous at best.
So, Kieran, very last question for me then. We get the last word from you. Having had this fascinating conversation over the past hour or so. How should fans ultimately think about private investors buying their football clubs?
My view, if I'm a football fan, I would be cautious because my objectives as a football fan are aligned with yours, Tom, as a Spurs fan, i.e., I want to see success on the pitch. And that will be delivered in terms of trophies, that will be delivered in terms of European participation, that will be delivered in terms of being one ahead of Arsenal, which is your biggest rivals, as you will know. The objectives of private equity and funds is to de-risk the investment. So one way of doing that is to get rid of relegation. One way of that is to give changes in the way that broadcast revenues are generated. The bigger clubs would like to take control of those on an individual basis, and we've seen proposals from that. So if you have more and more owners of football clubs who are of a similar mindset, then I think those changes could come about, because democratically, the way that the Premier League works is that if there's a 2/3 majority in vote of a decision, that decision goes through. So there's already a degree of caution. I think we have 12 to 13 owners from the United States where the sports culture is different. Do I have reservations about that as a football romantic, as a football legacy fan? Yes, I do. Equally, I'm not naive enough to say that football has to stay in its old form, and have therefore people such as myself outlived their usefulness to the football industry.
And
Kieran,
Kieran,
it's been
last thought.
fascinating. It has been fascinating. We've covered everything from £1 billion valuations to millions of pounds of relegation risks. And somehow it all comes down to, as you said, the 11 young men or the 11 young women and what happens over 90 minutes on a match day. Thank you very much for joining us today on The Long Short.
Thanks very much, guys. I really enjoyed it.